The crystal champagne flute slipped from my father's hand, shattering across the marble floor of the historic Cleveland estate. Michael Cole's arrogant smile vanished instantly. The grand ballroom fell dead silent. He was not staring at me. He was staring in absolute horror at the man walking through the heavy oak doors, respectfully holding the hand of my 3-year-old daughter, Hannah. It was David Reynolds, the governor of Ohio. To understand the absolute zero-sum mathematics of that shattered glass, we have to rewind the ledger exactly 3 hours earlier. We were attending my younger sister Jessica's $350,000 wedding reception. My family viewed life purely as a real estate acquisition, and Jessica was the golden property, newly merged with a hedge fund millionaire. I arrived alone, holding Hannah's hand, wearing a simple, tailored dark suit. I did not fit their targeted demographic. I am a 38-year-old single mother and a medically retired Air Force medical evacuation captain. My career did not yield lucrative stock options. It yielded severe spinal trauma, chronic pain, and an extensive network of physical scars. Upon my arrival at the venue, my father, Michael Cole, intercepted me in the lavishly decorated lobby. He was a ruthless construction and real estate tycoon who treated human beings like depreciable assets. He looked me up and down, his eyes coldly assessing my stiff posture and my reliance on a discreet orthopedic cane. He did not ask about my health or greet his granddaughter. He simply stated that my presence was an aesthetic liability. He told me that my visible fatigue and rigid movements would completely ruin the frame for the high-end society reporters covering the event. He directed me to a small, hidden overflow table stationed behind a massive floral arrangement near the noisy kitchen doors. My mother, Amanda, stood silently behind him. She was the ultimate complicit bystander, a woman who paid for her luxury lifestyle with the currency of absolute submission. She offered me a weak, pathetic smile, quietly enabling the psychological abuse just to maintain her comfortable position on the family board of directors. Jessica walked past, radiating arrogance in her custom silk gown, offering a condescending sigh at my practical shoes before demanding the photographers capture her better angle. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear or demand a seat at the head table. Anger was not loud this time. It was strictly clinical. I bypassed the emotional reaction entirely and guided Hannah to the designated table of the cast-off. I sat in the shadows, observing the theater of their fake perfection. They thought they were isolating me, proving my absolute irrelevance to their high society network. They did not realize that putting an auditor in the dark only gives them a much better vantage point to observe the structural flaws of the entire building. They operated on the fallacy that prestige equals power. I knew firsthand that true power is tested when the sky is falling, not when the champagne is flowing. I sat perfectly still, calculating the exact cost of my continued silence, realizing that my biological ties to these people were officially a bankrupt investment. The toxicity reached its peak during the lavish dinner reception. Michael, heavily intoxicated by both expensive bourbon and his own manufactured authority, took the microphone for the father of the bride's speech. He praised Jessica as his ultimate success story, a flawless merger of wealth and beauty. Then, needing a contrast to highlight his golden child, he deliberately turned his attention to my hidden corner. His voice boomed through the massive sound system, echoing off the stone walls. He pointed me out to the hundreds of wealthy investors and socialites, explicitly calling me a pathetic veteran. He publicly stated that I was currently living on government welfare to feed my child, a tragic failure who had wasted her life in the mud while the real world made money. Jessica giggled from the head table. A ripple of polite, cruel laughter swept through the elite crowd. They were laughing to maintain their alignment with the man who controlled the most lucrative real estate zoning contracts in the city. I did not gasp. I did not throw my drink or run out of the ballroom in tears. I simply looked down and meticulously folded my linen napkin into a perfect, mathematically precise square. Society often misinterprets a survivor's silence as submission or weakness. They fail to understand that when you have survived catastrophic environments, you do not waste operational energy on petty arguments. My silence was not acceptance. It was a highly calculated restraint mechanism. I endured the immediate humiliation because I was quietly analyzing the entire battlefield, waiting for the exact variable that would guarantee the absolute destruction of the enemy. As the crowd chuckled at my expense, my mind snapped back to a memory of my late grandfather, Walter, a decorated combat veteran. He once told me that honor has no weight until it is tested by those who have none. He taught me that you never negotiate your dignity with a coward. Sitting there in the dim light, smoothing the edges of my napkin, I initiated an internal operational shift. I was no longer an unwanted daughter attending a family obligation. I was an active combatant evaluating a hostile threat. My father thought his public humiliation was a display of ultimate dominance. He had no idea that I was simply categorizing his words as evidence of a fundamentally corrupt character. I was formally closing the accounts on my family. I just sat in the quiet watching the clock, knowing that the structural integrity of his empire was about to be permanently compromised. Just as the cruel laughter began to fade, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung wide open. The sudden interruption killed the music instantly. Governor David Reynolds strode into the ballroom, holding little Hannah's hand. He was not just the highest executive in Ohio, he was a former Marine. A man who commanded absolute respect in both military and civilian arenas. He had found Hannah in the lobby admiring the ice sculptures and kindly offered to escort her back inside. Michael dropped his glass, the shattering crystal cutting through the dead silence. He scrambled out from behind the head table, frantically attempting to deploy his sycophantic charm, eager to welcome the most powerful man in the state to his daughter's wedding. But Governor Reynolds bypassed him completely. He did not even register Michael's extended hand or desperate greeting. He walked with heavy, deliberate purpose straight past the elite VIP tables, navigating directly toward the shadowed corner near the kitchen doors. The room fell into a suffocating, breathless silence. The governor stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my hidden table. He released Hannah's hand, snapped his heels together with a sharp, percussive crack, and raised his hand in a flawless, rigid military salute. "Good evening, Captain Cole," the governor announced, his voice carrying the unmistakable heavy weight of profound reverence. I slowly stood up, ignoring the shooting pain in my spine. I didn't salute as I was in civilian clothes, but I stood at perfect military attention, meeting his gaze with absolute discipline. The governor turned slightly, addressing the stunned, silent crowd. He did not yell, but his voice was a lethal instrument. He publicly dismantled my father's entire narrative. He announced to the room of elite investors that I was not a pathetic charity case. I was the medical evacuation commander who had successfully executed 14 consecutive, highly classified medical extractions during the devastating 36-hour Kentucky flood campaign. I was the officer who had hovered a helicopter in blinding rain to pull his own nephew out of a sinking vehicle. He told them that I had permanently shattered my own spine in the process of saving 32 civilian lives. The power flip was instantaneous and absolute. The arrogant smirks on the faces of my family members were wiped away, replaced by a stark, primal panic. They were not shocked by their own horrific behavior. They were shocked that their designated victim possessed a level of honor and high-ranking gratitude they could not even begin to comprehend. Michael Cole's entire social currency evaporated in a matter of seconds. The wealthy socialites who had just laughed at me were now staring at my father with profound disgust. The governor of Ohio had just publicly declared me a state hero, completely invalidating my family's toxic supremacy. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the structural integrity of my father's empire violently collapse in real time. I did not stay for the cake cutting. I took Hannah's hand, nodded to the governor, and walked out of the estate, leaving my family to suffocate in the toxic vacuum they had created. By the next morning, my phone was vibrating endlessly. My mother, Amanda, left frantic voicemails, crying and begging me to let the incident go. She pleaded with me to protect the family face, claiming that my father's business partners were suddenly pulling out of massive development deals due to the social fallout. She desperately wanted me to issue a public statement of forgiveness to smooth over the massive public relations disaster. I did not call her back. I simply deleted the voicemails and emptied the trash folder. I had transitioned entirely from enduring their abuse to executing a systemic administrative retaliation. The public humiliation at the wedding was merely a social execution. I required a financial one. I picked up my phone and dialed Frank Miller. Frank was not just a senior partner at a top-tier law firm. He was my late grandfather Walter's oldest combat brother and his designated estate executor. For years, my father had told me that Walter's estate had been entirely liquidated to cover my mother's medical and living expenses. But sitting in my quiet apartment, applying the cold logic of an auditor, I realized that a man who treated his wounded daughter like disposable inventory would not hesitate to lie about financial assets. I formally retained Frank and instructed him to initiate a merciless forensic audit of my grandfather's estate. I requested a complete, unredacted history of the trust fund that Walter had supposedly left for me, which my family had meticulously concealed. Frank deployed a team of aggressive financial investigators to bypass my father's internal accountants and secure the raw banking data directly through court-subpoenaed financial records. This was no longer a family dispute over a dinner table seating arrangement. This was a professional escalation. I was applying the exact same strategic pressure I used in combat logistics. You do not argue with the enemy. You systematically cut off their supply lines. I went to the park with Hannah, pushing her on the swings in the crisp afternoon air, completely detached from the panic I knew was currently tearing through my father's executive boardroom. I was not seeking an apology. I was seeking a full accounting of what was rightfully mine, and I was fully prepared to let the law extract it from them pound by pound. The forensic audit yielded a catastrophic, lethal discovery. 72 hours later, Frank Miller summoned me to his downtown office. He did not offer coffee or pleasantries. He slid a thick, blue-bound dossier across his glass desk. The documentation revealed a massive, coordinated financial crime. My father and my sister, Jessica, had systematically forged my signature on federal trust documents over a consecutive 2-year period. They had illegally liquidated my entire $150,000 inheritance, but they had not used the money for personal luxury. They had routed the stolen funds through shell companies to use as bribery capital to secure lucrative state real estate zoning contracts. This was the absolute kill shot. My father had not just stolen from his wounded daughter, he had committed severe state-level felony fraud and political corruption. I immediately forwarded the entire dossier directly to the governor's office. By the next morning, Governor Reynolds expedited the dossier to the state attorney general and federal prosecutors. An emergency joint task force, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, immediately froze every single one of Michael Cole's active municipal bids pending a formal criminal indictment. Facing immediate federal indictment and total financial ruin, my father tracked me down. He cornered me at a classic retro diner near my apartment. He did not look like a tycoon. He looked like a cornered rat. Right there, in front of the waitstaff and patrons, Michael Cole fell to his knees on the sticky linoleum floor. He sobbed uncontrollably, grabbing the edge of my coat, begging me to write a formal letter of leniency to the federal judge to keep him out of federal prison. This perfectly illustrates the illusion of power in an empty soul. Narcissists and manipulators operate under the severe delusion that they still possess leverage even when their resources are completely bankrupt. They believe they can still demand compliance and extract mercy from a position of absolute fraud. My father genuinely believed his tears could somehow override a federal crime. He did not understand that the moment he forged my signature, his emotional and legal bank accounts were permanently liquidated. He had absolutely nothing left to offer, and nothing left to threaten me with. You cannot negotiate a peace treaty when you have already surrendered all your weapons. I looked down at the man who had mocked my injuries and stolen my grandfather's legacy. I did not raise my voice or offer a parting insult. I do not write letters for felons. I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any human warmth. I paid my tab, stepped around his kneeling form, and walked out of the diner, leaving him completely paralyzed by the crushing weight of his own destruction. The total collapse of the Cole family was executed with clinical efficiency. Stripped of his billionaire safety net and facing severe criminal indictments for wire fraud and bribery, my father's bravado completely evaporated. He is currently awaiting federal trial, his corporate assets entirely frozen. Jessica's hedge fund husband immediately filed for a highly publicized divorce to protect his own corporate image, leaving her drowning in the massive debt of her own manufactured lifestyle. Amanda simply faded into the background, a silent ghost in a bankrupt, ruined empire. The courts swiftly restored my stolen inheritance with heavy punitive damages. I did not buy a sports car or a luxury watch. I took the entire settlement and established a highly specialized trauma recovery fund for wounded combat veterans returning to civilian life. I built an unshakable foundation from the exact resources my family had tried to steal. Months later, I walked hand in hand with Hannah through the quiet city park, our boots crunching softly on the fresh, pristine blanket of winter snow. The air was cold, incredibly sharp, and utterly peaceful. I want to speak directly to you now. This is a letter to the outcasts. If you have spent your entire life feeling like you are standing on the absolute edge of someone else's narrative, constantly belittled by the people whose blood you share, you must stop trying to earn a seat at their toxic table. Society will continuously pressure you to be the ultimate peacemaker, telling you that family requires endless compromise and blind forgiveness. Reject that narrative entirely. You do not owe anyone your sanity just to keep their facade intact. Performative peace is simply a polite term for silent suffering. When the people closest to you are secretly laying explosives in the foundation of your life, the only rational response is to walk away and detonate their plans from a completely safe, legally enforced distance. True peace is not always warm and fuzzy. It does not always look like a crowded Thanksgiving dinner filled with laughter. Sometimes, true peace is solitary. It is cold, uncompromising, and fiercely protected. Reclaim your intellectual and emotional property, cut the toxic ties, absorb the temporary pain of the demolition, and violently rebuild your own empire from the ashes. You are not a background character in their manufactured drama. You are the sole architect of your future. If this story opened a piece of your heart, please hit subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today, and leave your thoughts below. Let's protect our honor together.